Hello, I'm Pastor David E. Johnson, and I want to welcome you to our latest episode of the Empowered for Destiny podcast. I'm very excited about the topic that we're going to share. This is a new endeavor for us. It's actually such a large topic that we want to share it over 2 episodes of the podcast. And so we're super excited about you being here, and we're looking to engage you in this topic in a way that'll make you want to come back. Please, would you do us a favor? Would you would you share, would you subscribe to this podcast? It's very important to us that we provide high quality content to you and that we grow a community. Can you help others experience the difference of destiny? I'd be very appreciative of you as you do so. Also, feel free to comment, because we do read the comments. We try to interact with our audience because we're really working to grow a community around this thought of destiny. You've heard that definition before. Destiny is the undeniable truth that God has an amazing plans for your life hidden inside himself and placed in seed form inside of you. That seed of destiny that lives on the inside of you needs an ecosystem in order for it to become everything that God intended for it to be. Today, we want to talk to you about how education is a part of the ecosystem that God uses to turn that seed of destiny into a harvest in your own life. There's a passage of scripture that is very important to me and has marked my life. I want to share it with you. It's Job chapter 36, verse 22. In the King James Version, it says, "Behold, God exalteth by his power. Who teacheth like him?" Often people have visions and dreams of grandeur in their life without actually thinking through the process of formation and reformation that's required for them to take their seed of destiny and have it emerge into a full-blown harvest. I've often heard the statement that God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. But the process that he uses to qualify the called is a process that includes education. Yes, God can exalt you by his power, but the place and the station he exalts you to, he wants you to be prepared for that space and that station when you get there. And so he teaches you all of the things that you need to go from where you are to where he wants you to be. Today, I am honored to share this podcast stage with a dear friend, a dear partner, someone I have grown to have very deep admiration and respect for the work that he does. I have said it in his forums that I consider him to be a modern day Booker T. Washington as someone who is utilizing education as a way to uplift a people group. And so I am so honored to have our guest here. His name is Dr. Clarence Nixon. Dr. Nixon, thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you, Pastor David Johnson, for having me.
Okay. There's just a lot that we can share about who you are. You have a 40-year plus career in technology, in leadership. You sit on corporate boards of Fortune 500 companies. You have C-suite experience, particularly in the CIO space. And along with doing all of that work in the corporate space, you have dedicated yourself through an initiative that we call the t.Lab to helping young people progress through education, and particularly education into STEM careers. Can just talk a little bit about who you are and that journey that brought you from where you started to where you are now?
As a young person living in Detroit, growing up on the northwest side of Detroit, I, just like so many young people, had the opportunity to work for both Ford Motor Company, General Motors, and Chrysler Corporation.
Wow.
And so, like so many, my corporate career actually began in those organizations. And with that, and developing skills and capabilities in the technology sector and the finance sector, it led me to multiple places and multiple destinations. It led me to Aluminum Company of America. It led me to American Cyanogen Company. And then finally, my corporate destiny ended with Sara Lee. And after Sara Lee, I decided to go into business for myself. And since in every capacity that I'd worked in, especially in the automobile industry, I was always solving problems. And so it made sense that I would go into the turnaround management sector. And so went into the turnaround management sector. CNC Group was the name of the organization. And in doing so, I had the opportunity to do a turnaround at the largest collection of African American newspapers in the country. And in doing that, I had an opportunity to be so exposed to some real great organizations. And I must say that the Chicago Defender newspaper is such a great organization, and they have a parade every year. It's called the Bud Billiken Day Parade. And that parade is a parade that brings millions of people, millions of Chicagoans to the south side of Chicago. And it is all about education. And so I left Chicago Defender in real times, and I was so impressed with what Chicago Defender was doing with education. I just decided that that would be something that I would do. And so began at my family church, which was Mount Olive Baptist Church of Detroit, began with it. And we had the opportunity to build a t.Lab there. And the vision was then that we would have second grade students and third grade students is what we would work with, because the reality of what the results were saying is that, especially for African American students, that they were failing in second grade. And those who failed in second grade would not, they had, just poor probability of turning that failure around from second grade throughout their careers. And so we said, hey, we're going to work on with second grade and third grade kids, and we're going to help them academically. And that was done right in the cusp of a lot of great things that were happening in Detroit around education. And so t.Lab was born then, was born at Mount Olive Baptist Church. And we moved from second and third grade students to supporting students from kindergarten through college is what we support today.
Wow. Wow. As you think about your work at the highest levels, CIO roles, consulting, global systems, cybersecurity, what have you begun to notice about people coming into those systems that you seek to solve in t.Lab?
What we knew that kids of African descent were not performing academically at the levels that were necessary to develop and maintain a set of competencies that would have them prepared for the corporate environment.
And when did you realize that this was more than just a workforce issue, or workforce development issue, that it was a formation issue in terms of your unique insights around character and values and that foundation. When did you come to the realization on how fundamental the issue was and how all of the things that could, in some circles, be considered separate? When did you come to some realization that all of these things are tied together?
I'd probably say, we started t.Lab in 2007. So I'd probably say roughly about 2009, 2010 is when the light kind of came on, and you began to see and know that there were factors that were so significant in the development of, well, really all students for this matter, but that there were factors that were relevant to students of African descent that was just so significant and so important. And so being that we had moved from our initial location, which was Mount Olive Baptist Church of Detroit, to Detroit World Outreach Church, we had moved from one to the other. And with our move to Detroit World Outreach Church, it brought a new vigor, a new life. It brought some insight that we had lacked. And that insight came from the senior pastor of Detroit World Outreach Church. He ultimately became the bishop, but it's Bishop Benjamin Jabert. And it was he and his insight and his teaching that really kind of led us to some real significant things. And we began to know and understand that spiritually you must develop and you must have a core foundation spiritually in order to be successful.
Amen. So our topic, we talked about education. Our topic today is a crisis of competence in education.
Right.
And that title, A Crisis of Competence, is in the book. You see it there on your screen. And there's information there about how you can find the book on Amazon, both in a Kindle or a hard copy version. But that thought, a crisis of competence, is a thought from your book that we want to explore in this first of two sessions. What do you mean by that crisis of competence? Not grades, but competence. And how do you define competence beyond just getting good grades?
So competence, I would define competence as an enduring ability to do something effectively, yielding fruitfulness both quantitatively and qualitatively. And competence consists of demonstrated skills, abilities, and knowledge for a specific field of study. And so when we had started in 2007, and we started with a focus of helping, second and third grade students be competent, what we quickly discovered is that the methods that were used to evaluate or judge students, those methods weren't effective. And so grade point average, or GPA, has just proven to not to be an effective way of doing it. And so we had to search and look for a tool that we could leverage and use to measure competence and to measure effectiveness. And it was one that we deployed that is done on a national basis and even on an international basis, and that is the American College Test, or ACT.
Gotcha. You asked me in an interview that I did on your platform about my background going from a Flint school to MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and to University of Michigan, and both studying electrical engineering at both institutions. You asked me what was my assessment of my background and I told you I came to the stark realization that all A's are not created equal.
No, they're not.
And so my question for you is, are we producing students who are being affirmed but not formed?
Absolutely.
Say more about that and
Absolutely.
your background and
Absolutely.
experience in that area.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I just got to go to the spiritual foundation. I mean, the Bible's clear. Deuteronomy 28:13, God makes it clear that obedience is significant and important.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, he says there that if you are obedient, that I will make you the head, not the tail, above only, never beneath. And that became a standard for us. That became a standard for us. And so when we set out, we began to look at the character traits that are significant and important for students to be successful. And number one was obedience. Number one was obedience, because it's a promise from God that if you are obedient, what it is that he will do. And we've just seen it over and over again throughout t.Lab. We've just seen it. We serve, well over 6,950, parents and students on 5 continents, 9 countries. And we've seen that obedience is so significant and so important.
Got it. You are a systems person. Your background is systems, IT systems primarily, but now you are looking at education as a system. How did we get here? What systems level decisions led us to this point where we have this crisis of competence in our American educational system?
Well, one of the first things when we initially started, just due to my background, I looked at technology as a means and as a way of getting results. So I said, hey, we can leverage and use technology to deliver results. And it was not necessarily, well, it just wasn't. The educational systems did not adopt and were not adopting technology. When we knew, there was no doubt about that leveraging technology was just such an effective way of delivering education. It became a way by which you can deliver content and specific content unique to a individual student. It became a way by which you could measure and get the results, so quickly. And so technology just was so significant and so important. And so in our systems, we put together a set of digital systems or a digital platform that we leverage and use to deliver services to parents and students, 5 continents, 9 countries.
And what problems do you see as you're working to deliver those outcomes for your students globally? What systemic issues do you see with the educational system that they are engaged in apart from t.Lab? And is it different globally than in the U.S., or is it across the board issues, or is it mainly a North American, U.S. student family educational system issue?
I think the issue is it is an international issue.
Okay.
The systems primarily for educating go back hundreds of years. And so classroom and the types of classrooms where you have students going in a classroom and they sit and a teacher delivers a lesson to a student and the students read books. It is just an old way of doing things. It just doesn't fit. And what we discovered, it just didn't fit with technology. Did not fit with technology. And so we designed and developed a set of systems that students can engage and leverage and use and get feedback. And what we discovered is that the old way of doing things, the older way of doing things, produced students who were reactive and dependent. And what's needed today, especially, are students who are proactive and independent. Especially in a world of artificial intelligence. It is just so significant and so true. And another thing that is so significant, one of the things that we discovered that studying is not necessarily viewed as a science and is not necessarily taught as a discipline, especially in public schools. And so students come to school and they're not taught how to study. And so one of the things that we quickly learned is that you had to teach students how to study, and that studying is a discipline, it is a science. And students must be, as I said, proactive and independent learners is what it takes in order to be successful. Now, there are some top-notch prep schools in the country that do this. The Harkness method is a method of teaching. And in the Harkness method, the students assume responsibility for teaching themselves in a classroom. And teachers, then, they're delivering content, say maybe 25-30% of the time, but it's the students who are doing it. And so we discovered that Harkness method, and that Harkness method is such a powerful tool, and it is a way to engage and, once again, drive proactive, independent learning.
So proactive, independent learning, understanding study as a discipline.
Right.
When you think about that, these three skills, sometimes I'm watching videos online, like open source content from an MIT, a Stanford, a Harvard. It's always interesting to me that when I do that students from other countries will comment that what's considered premier and elite is really kind of mid-tier work. Chinese students will get online and say so. Indian students will get online. From Hong Kong, Korean students, they'll get on and say, hey, you guys are putting this out like this is top tier stuff, but it is mid-tier work on a global basis. Do you find that to be true? Are we middle of the road as a nation?
Absolutely.
Please say more.
There is a international organization, PISA, and PISA measures the competence level of the top 64 nations. And the U.S. at one particular point in time was in the top quartile. Now the U.S. has fallen to the bottom quartile of the list. And so we know this. We know that China is growing in its strength and education-wise. Chinese universities are now becoming very powerful and are considered to be some of the best universities. Now, still, the U.S. still has the greatest capacity. So if you want to look at what the United States has, more so than anybody, we have the greatest capacity to educate. So in terms of classrooms and books and capabilities, we have the greatest capacity. But we're not performing.
Wow.
We're not performing. And what I'd say is that if you look at nations like South Korea or China or Japan, they are ones who drive discipline and their students are just more disciplined. That is just it. They're more disciplined.
Wow. You defend standardized testing when a lot of people reject it. Why do you say that the ACT and the SAT matter and are good standards for assessing educational competence?
One of the things that we know that ACT and SAT are better indicators of performance in college than grade point average. We know that there is a such thing as grade inflation, right? And we know that inconsistent grading and grade inflation has just had a huge impact. And so we know that performance on ACT and SAT provide better indicators as to how well someone will perform in college, especially that freshman and sophomore years. They do a much better job of that performance. And, at one particular point in time, especially during COVID, a lot of the universities had basically gone test optional. And they said, well, students didn't have to take it. And since students didn't have to take it, a lot of parents and students chose not to. And this would be true of the Ivy League schools. And so here it is, the Ivy League schools were saying this test optional. Well, now, after doing so, and after having issues with letting students in who were not necessarily capable or ready to perform in those institutions, they're now going back and they're now having ACT and SAT as mandatory in order to be admitted into those institutions.
You talked about grade inflation. What is inflation doing to parents, students, and colleges? And when report cards say one thing, but competence says another, who's paying the price for that?
The parent and the student, because the parent and the student believe that the student can perform. And they come out of high school thinking that they can perform at that level. And they can't. I mean, it's just a reality. They can't. If you look at the Ivy League schools, for the most part, their median ACT scores are, I'd say probably 34, 35, 36. I know Harvard's is probably 35, 36. I mean, and that's their median score, and that's probably true for most of the Ivy League schools. And if you look at just the top tier or the tier 1 universities, you'd see that ACT score is in the 30s. And so, for ACT, the benchmark for ACT, so the minimum score that you can get where a person can be considered that they can do college work is 21.25, right? And so when you look at an institution like Harvard or University of Michigan, their median scores are 33, 34, 35. So that's a huge difference. And for students of African descent, African American students, their median score in 2025 was 15.9. 15.9. And it's not that they can't perform at that level. It's not that they can't perform at that level. It's just the systems that are in place, the beliefs, the false beliefs. There's this belief, and I hear people say this all the time. People will say, I just don't test well. That's what people will say. I just don't, I can't do standardized tests. I can do the work, but I can't do standardized tests. And what you'll find is that competence is one thing that is developed. If you had a competence, if you put in the work, you will develop the skills that it takes in order to do the work, in order to perform well on ACT. And so for t.Lab in 2025, our median ACT score was 30.5. 30.5.
Wow. Got it. Your system, and we'll talk a little bit more in our next episode about it, puts a lot of responsibility on parents.
Right.
Why does transformation have to begin at home?
It's biblical. Deuteronomy 6 and 7 says, and I'm paraphrasing, that parents are required to teach a child morning, noon, and night. And so the Bible would say that parent is the teacher, the first teacher and the real teacher. Everybody else is just kind of filling roles. And so the parent is the teacher of the child. And so we certainly support that. One of the things that we believe that it is our responsibility to stand in the gap for parents because it's tough for parents. Parents aren't given the level of support, the systemness that is necessary for them to be successful. And so that's one of the things that we do. Bishop Benjabert had said in service one time, he said, dreams are reality, are fantasy. He said, dreams are fantasy without a regimen. And so one of the things that we took from there is that students were responsible for having a regimen. And a regimen in t.Lab is a document that a student maintains that records how they spend 168 hours a week. And so we leverage and use those kind of tools with parents and with students to help them be successful. And so we know the Bible says that the parents are the first teachers and they have that responsibility. And so with that, we know and believe that that parents are just so critical in this process. And parents have just been so critical to our success. Our success have been based on getting the parents involved in our processes and in our systems.
What are the most common ways parents unknowingly surrender their educational responsibility?
Oh, wow, great question. Let me think about that. I'd say that one is by assuming, parents assume often that if the parent didn't do something well academically, that they can't then turn around and help their child be successful. So that's one of the things parents would,
Wow.
and nothing couldn't be further from the truth.
Further from the truth.
Right. Nothing couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
And so, it is all about the parent yielding and knowing and understanding. I'm just telling you, the Bible is clear. It is the book that parents should leverage and use to raise their children.
So how can parents who are not educators themselves still become the powerful builders of the competence in their children?
Oh, wow. It is so simple and easy. It is, first of all, it is by being models for that you want them to do. Models in terms of character, models in terms of obedience and discipline. Being those kind of models help because those are the core foundation that children need in order to succeed. And when parents can display those and display those sorts of things, children have no choice but to be successful.
Amen. You speak very directly about the educational reality facing African American students. What hard truths do we need the courage to say out loud? What truth it's difficult to hear that we need to hear as a people?
We tend not to own up to the fact that we are not performing academically. We believe that we are, and we're not. And until we come to that conclusion that we're not, nothing will change. Nothing can and will change. We have to know and understand what performance is and what performance isn't. Just like ACT, the African American students are dead last. Hispanic students have moved beyond African American students, so their median ACT score is roughly about 18. And then white students are above Hispanic students, and they have a median ACT score of about 20. And then Asian students have a median ACT score of 24.1. So they're the highest. And so these things become so significant and important, and owning up to the fact that things like ACT do measure competence, and that they are important, and that students can perform well, and that I don't believe that there is anything today that prevents a student from performing well academically. I don't think that there are any quote unquote issues of race that prevent a student from performing academically. And so there is a belief that there are issues of race, that the examinations are unfair. Nothing couldn't be further from the truth. Nothing couldn't be further from the truth. The exam is the exam, and the exam measures competence. And either you have it or you don't. And it measures competence at a particular point in time. It doesn't measure competence forever. It doesn't say this is your lot for the rest of your life. It doesn't say that. It just basically says that at this particular point in time, this is where you are. And so what I think we as a community must do is own up to the fact that we are not competent as we should be. Because, I'll put it like this, not only do we perform at the bottom for standardized tests, but even when you look at post-secondary standardized tests, we're at the bottom. So we're at the bottom for MCAT, for medical school, LSTAT for law school, DAT for dental school, GRE, GMAT, we're last. And I could take you to other examinations where it is true, whether it is the engineering entrance exams, we're last. The U.S. Medical licensing examinations, we're last. The advanced placement for computer science, we're last. And so we have, as a part of what we do with t.Lab, we share this information with parents and students. And for the most part, once we share this information with people, people, quite frankly, come to the conclusion that, yeah, there's some things that we must do. And so the fact that we're not performing is an issue that we have to take. And those things that we do put our time in, we perform at the absolute best. So we're the absolute best in athletics, in entertainment. We are the absolute best. And so we put our time there. And so one of the things that we do at t.Lab, we're always looking at how much time students are doing things. How much time do you spend studying? How much time do you spend in school? How much time are you spending in these areas? And so it is all about us as a people coming to the conclusion that we're not doing well now, and that we're going to need to do better in order to participate in this economy and in this, especially in this AI world.
So you subscribe to that. I think Malcolm Gladwell talked about the 10,000 hour rule.
Absolutely.
Okay, gotcha.
Absolutely.
That there's just no substitute for time spent actually developing the competence that you have.
And then having programming that maintains and drives accountability, because it's not for lack of money. I think it was in 2021. I think the number was something like, I want to say $8 billion was spent in the U.S. in education programs. And when you look at the results that we got in 2021, just dismal results. Dismal results. So we're spending the money. The money's there.
Do you find strong partnerships with t.Lab and the educational community, or are you viewed as a disruptor? Because sometimes when there's strong moneyed interests in these things, sometimes it was said when the woman came to pour her oil from her alabaster box on the feet of Jesus, Judas and others said this could have been given for the poor, but he didn't care about the poor. He cared about the bag. Do you find that you're considered a partner or a disruptor to some of the educational interests in your model?
I'll answer the question like this. We've had to look for those that we can partner with. And, we've done some great work. We've done work in a middle school in the city of Detroit, did an outstanding job. And so we've done some outstanding work. But we have a relationship now with an institution that's not too far from here, with Kettering University, where that is a relationship that values, we bring the same kind of values to the party and to the table with respect to performance. And so we've had to search and find those kind of partners. Kettering University would be one. The MKE Fellows in Milwaukee would be such an organization. And so we haven't necessarily been able to find supporters and performers and partners that would be aligned with what we know is this huge demand. I mean, the demand is just huge demand, especially among students of African descent. But even when you look outside of that, if you just look at the U.S. period, the U.S. period is not performing at levels that it has in the past, and neither is it performing at a level that is necessary to take advantage of the technology that exists today.
So, do you have examples of people who have come through your program that they came in, they were at a lower performing, they were at the lower end of the performance spectrum, but then they went through your process, they followed the system that you had, and then they came out as higher performing on the other end? Do you have examples like that of how we can help the students find their footing where they are and then make the progress forward?
Oh, absolutely. It just was so, most of our students who joined us at Detroit World Outreach, a lot of them did not perform at benchmark levels, right? Mm-hmm. And so after putting in place systems and performance standards, those students excelled. At one particular point in time, our median ACT score at t.Lab was 17. And we've moved it from 17 to, it was 31 one year, 30.5. And so we've moved that. And so for the most part, it's the issue. If you just look at the U.S., the median ACT score for students of African descent is 15.9. 15.9, and that tells you where our kids are. You cannot get around it. It's 15.9, and it tells you their performance levels. But then after that, look at what's happening after 4 years of college. So even after 4 years of college, and we're taking post-secondary standardized tests, not performing. And so, our students, that has just not been the case. Our students have performed exceptionally well. And I'd say it's because of the systemsness. There's no doubt we can improve. There's no question. No way are we perfect. But I say that it's been the systemsness. It's been the level of exposure and doing it early. We have metrics that we leverage and use. So, a metric will be, for study. Every hour homework is preceded by 2 hours of study. So it's a 2-to-1 relationship between homework and study. And folks are not necessarily aware of that. And that's something that we drive and that we push. And so we have just plenty of students. I don't want to necessarily say their names,
Right.
but there's plenty of students who have started. Oh, we'll just put it like this: ACT has accommodations. So for students who may have some challenges, maybe they have problems with vision, maybe they have problems with ADHD, they have accommodations. And those accommodations for those students can get time and a half to take the exam. They can take the ACT over 4 days. And those are just things that in systems that this is a priority, you find out and you work with parents and students to help them do it. So 2 years ago, we had a young man, and this young man was high GPA, performing well in terms of his academics, but his ACT score stayed at 17, 18, maybe 19. And so we worked with this student and got him an accommodation where he could take the exam one subject at a time over 4 days. A student went from 19 to 31, and he is now in a tier 1 college, great college, and doing exceptionally well in college. And so for the most part, most of our students will come that way. So most students will come. And, we have a young man that he and his parents, they're in Illinois, and start today. And the young man's median ACT score is 15. And so we know we're going to help this young man. We know that he's going to perform. He's going to perform well. And you just have to take and use and put in, you have to have the tools. You have to have tools of assessment, and you have to teach students tools of assessment, and you have to teach them things like gap analysis. So, how do you take the exam, and then how do you look at the things that you got right, but more importantly, the things that you got wrong, and then how do you begin to incorporate those things into study in order to improve yourself. And so, we call that gap analysis, and we designed an Excel macro that helps students with that. And so, but yeah, we've got just too many students that we've helped. As a matter of fact, that's probably most of them that, they start. I've got a student who started at 19 and ended up 35.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. You talked about a dream without a regimen is a fantasy.
A dream is a fantasy without a regimen.
When I think about that, I think about the mall map. Go into a mall, okay? They'll tell you, hey, there's all these stores here. But then it starts out by saying you are here. And if you can't see where you want to go, where you are, and map a path, a regimen
Right.
that gets you from here to there,
Right.
then no matter how much you dream it and can see it, you can never be it.
Right.
Do you feel like our systems are coddling kids and getting them to accept fantasy, or just not deal with the harsh reality of what it takes to get from where they are to where they want to go academically?
Absolutely. Just not dealing with the harsh reality of what it takes. What we say in t.Lab is every student should have a detailed study plan for every class. And that study plan is one that's should be developed, at least 1, if not 2 months before the new semester. So students should never go to class and have not been so exposed to the content of the class. Just can't do that. Can't do that. Must be exposed to the class. Or measuring your daily performance. We have what's called a classroom performance scorecard. And there are basically 11 things that students are required to measure in every class to determine how well they perform. because, once again, our old systems, and they are based on the agriculture and that culture, and things could take forever. A kid could go to school and they would be in class 6 weeks and they wouldn't know that they weren't performing until 6 weeks. We just said, no, that's not good enough. Students should be proactive and they have to be accountable. And so students should measure how well they've done in every important class every single day. So, did you get to class on time? Did you bring your annotated notes? Did you ask a question? Did you answer a question? Did you take a statement that another student said and validated that student and built upon that? So took something that maybe a student said that was incorrect, but you validated that student and built upon it. And so those sorts of things we ask students to do in class on a day-by-day basis and then measure those things. And so, it's just the things that we feel students must do.
Well, I can remember a few years ago where I was at a workplace event at General Motors, the National Day of Prayer. We're coming up on the month of May, where we did that. And I was to pray about education. And the thought came to me that in our educational system, we have traded the tree of life for the tree of knowledge. And God told Adam, if you eat from that tree, you will surely die. But it wasn't God wanting to kill him. He separated from God, who is life. As you think about, and you quote in your book, a tree is known by its fruit.
Absolutely.
Do you sense, as you have assessed our educational system, that there is a challenge because we have disconnected from the tree of life and come over to this tree of knowledge, and we're experiencing the fruit of that switch?
Absolutely. But more importantly, when you look at, there is a concept, it's called the 7 mountains. And these are all institutions that are all very influential in our lives. So these are just institutions. Education would be one. Government would be another one. Business and commerce would be another one. And, entertainment would be one. And when you look at those, what you see as the most influential industry is entertainment. Entertainment is the most influential. Education and the church are not as influential as they used to be. And so the church in itself has a lot to do to go back and gain what it's lost.
No, that's a great statement. In our work, I've developed a concept that I call academic salvation. The idea that Jesus didn't just come to save us spiritually, but he also came, when it talks about soul prosperity, he came to empower us to overcome everything we need educationally to walk in the destiny that he has for us. Do you see education as something that requires not just instruction, but transformation at the soul level?
Absolutely.
Say more about your thoughts in that space.
Absolutely. So knowing what we know about what God has demanded of us, and he's basically just has asked us that we be faithful, that we be obedient. That we be obedient. And being obedient is just so significant and so important. And I see it every day with parents and students. Those students who are obedient, who fulfill the lessons as they're supposed to fill them out, who participate in the activities as they're supposed to participate in, those are the ones who are going to be just more successful. It's just the reality. And so it is just so critical that we leverage and use our spiritual nature to drive any and all that we do.
Mm-hmm. Where do you find our students blocked most? Is it spiritual? Is it intellectual? Is it emotional? Is it physical limitations? Is it structural in terms of where they sit in society? Where is the biggest lever that we move to move our students forward?
Great question. Great question. I'd say that the biggest lever that we can push to push students is really pushing them to seek and to seek God and be obedient. I mean, it is just too critical, too important. And when you look at the influences on them come from the entertainment sector, whether it be social media, that's where the influences come from. And it's not that those things can't be conduits for great education.
Yeah.
And so they're conduits for great education. And so how is it something that students leverage and use, and they use it, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? How could something so powerful not be used to gain academically?
Yeah, it's interesting you said that as you were saying it. I'm reminded of the fact that TikTok is used for entertainment here, but in China, where it was birthed,
Right.
they use it for education.
Right,
They're educating their young people
Right.
and entertaining
right,
their chief competitors on a global basis,
Right.
nationally speaking. Wow. Okay. We started this lesson or this podcast today with the truth that God exalts by his power. Who can teach like him? That part of the process that God uses to get you to the destiny he has for you is he works you through the blockages that can hold you back educationally. That's important because without that, then faith becomes what I call lottery testimonies. You know what a lottery testimony is, right? Wealth without wisdom, increase without insight, okay? Where something magic happens and we come out on the other end, when the part of God's process is he doesn't just magically download you, he puts you in a process, helps you develop the discipline that you need, and grows you to the place where you can be the leader that he wants you to be in a space. You see on your screen now information about t.Lab. We'll go into more about what t.Lab is in our next episode, but I don't want to cut you away from the punchline here that there is a place that I highly recommend, an institution that can help you if you have some young people at any stage, or even adults and continuing education programs and so on. There's things that are available to you, and you'll hear more about that in our next episode. But I wanted to make sure that we did not get off this one without giving you a punchline that there is a solution that's available to you. Again, please like, share, and subscribe to the Empowered for Destiny podcast. Also, you see the information there to Dr. Nixon's book, A Crisis of Competence. And I want you to be moved and motivated to find out the information that you need, and so that you and your children and children's children can prosper. If you can make the moves in your own life and in your family, you can change the trajectory of your family line for generations to come. And there is academic salvation. The tagline to that statement or the teaching I did on academic salvation was, and he shall call his name Jesus, and he shall save his people from their schools. Not from their sins, but from their schools. And I just want you to know, like, that's a real thing. But his resurrection power is also available to you in education. And there are people and institutions like t.Lab that are there for that purpose. Listen, I pray this was encouraging and a blessing to you. Thank you, Dr. Nixon, for being here. We will see you next time and continue to receive your empowerment for destiny. See you next time.